I mean, go down to a bank and you ask people, you ask every person who's signing a mortgage there, or refinancing their house, or assuming a debt for any purpose whatsoever, expanding business, whatever. You ask that person after they pen their name to a contract, are you under any misconception that you've assumed a debt? You know, and I defy you to find anybody who doesn't understand that. You know, so there's no question about that part. The question is, did we borrow the money from the bank when it just created a representation of our own promissory obligation? That's one question. Now, if it just created a representation of our promissory obligation, at most they have at risk is the cost of publishing it. Might be $1 to create $100,000, you know. That's all they have at risk. So why are they charging you interest on $100,000? If interest is justified, why isn't it charged on the $1? And being as the real creditor who gave up property for the promissory obligation, who gave up that $100,000 house for a $100 promissory note, being as they're the only one who has property at risk because they're the only one who's going to suffer if we don't maintain the integrity of that promissory obligation by contributing to the pool of wealth $100,000 of our own production so that they can receive a like volume of our production from us in payment. Only then are we upholding our contract. But so, again, it's a promissory obligation, It's a promissory obligation. And our payments are retired because we owe less and less and less when we pay it off. The money is just a portable accounting system. It's like actual physical tokens when it's physical money. And so it's our carrying around of that $100,000 with us when we're a creditor that is a testament to the fact that we gave $100,000 of property up and we deserve now to receive $100,000 of property. You know, this allows us to specialize and to increase our prosperity by virtue of a specialization. So regardless of whether you understand this idea that principal has to be retired, our real debt is to the real creditor, and the only way it's performed, I don't know how you can't understand this. Think about it. You know, I build you a $100,000 house. You say, okay, Mike, I build bamboo fly fishing rods. I will produce $100,000 worth of bamboo fly rods. That might not be what you want, but because of other people contributing their production to the overall pool of wealth, you get to select what you want of it with $100,000, and I've only contributed my like contribution if I've contributed. So I receive $100,000, you receive $100,000 for the bamboo fly fishing rods that you build. How do you certify that you've produced this for me and not as a reward to yourself? You pay the $100,000 out of circulation. You sell a rod for $5,000. You pay $5,000 out of circulation. That went to me then because $5,000 of your production exists for me to reap as my reward for $5,000 of the $95,000 remaining that you owe. That $5,000 had to be retired from circulation because it no longer represents anything. You fulfilled the obligation to pay it off. It's just as in the parable of perfect economy. Simple thing to understand. Money is evidence that you're owed that much production. Period. That's all it is. Now, when a bank claims to loan it to you when they didn't even give up anything, that's a falsification, period. It's as if I said, oh, you owe me $100,000 just because I give you a piece of paper that says I owe you, you owe me $100,000. You know, that isn't what the piece of paper means, because you issued a promissory obligation, which obligation precipitates to the real creditor who gave up property for it. It doesn't precipitate to the bank. The bank has no claim to fulfillment or enrichment. It gave up nothing, period. It just created a further representation of the promissory obligation, you know. So that's simple. How does this obfuscation multiply? I mean, I'd be bored to hear it. I mean, how can people say they don't understand this? What don't you understand? You don't understand promissory obligations? You don't understand that the bank's obfuscation of our promissory obligations multiplies falsified indebtedness into terminal sums of falsified indebtedness? You know, it isn't because the interest doesn't exist. You know, it does exist. It exists in the circulation. It's because the only way you can maintain the circulation, being as the bank can't purchase that much of our production, the production, related production that exists is only equal to the principal. It can't purchase the principal plus the interest in our production because the interest doesn't even exist in our production. Number one. It isn't something it wants to do either, because then it's obvious that they're just publishing money and it's enriching them. You know, and why? You know, let me publish the money. If you believe that's just or right, I wouldn't even want it. You know, Benjamin Franklin did that. He didn't collect the principal for himself. He didn't charge interest based on the principal for himself. You know, and besides, the story comes from my parable of perfect economy and the Pennsylvania currency that Ellen Hodgson Brown praised as the most brilliant banking model in history. What didn't even exist. That's my story, my words, my explanation of mathematically perfected economy issued through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. I don't know. What don't people get? You think banking is justified still? You think we should all suffer terminal failure, foreclosure, bankruptcy, and we should go to the courts arguing we don't have a debt, even though we sign a piece of paper assuming a debt, even though the real creditor can only acquire from the pool of wealth if we contribute to the pool of wealth an equal volume of our own production? I mean, what don't people get? I mean, people claim they don't understand this. Well, I hear from a few people, most people I hear from, including a woman I had a just tremendous visit with this morning. You know, I understood it in vivid detail, extending out to just any implementation and everything. Didn't have to explain a thing to her. You know, we spent most of the time talking about the story behind it. You know, the history, you know, of it, and you know, she said she no sooner began to read my work and she realized it was the only answer, the only math that worked. What do other people tell you who get it? The exact same thing. Everybody who gets it says the same thing, and people claim they don't get it. Well, I don't know. What's the problem? What don't you get? What do I need to explain that hasn't been explained? Anybody saying there, Ivan?
I'm just back, Mike, answering a question to Ambassador. Yeah, it's, you know, it's just a standard question. Why, if you got a property of somebody and the bank created the notes, then they gave you the money to give to the creditor. So how come the bank is not the creditor? But this, I mean, this was explained many times before, and if you just...
It's been explained many times today alone. The bank doesn't give up anything. The bank doesn't give up anything. You know?
So in other words, if you have three people, me, Mike, and yourself, Ambassador, and by the way, if you want to call in, I don't know, let me know, maybe in the chat box, and then I can PM you Mike's Skype, or if you have Mike on your Skype, or Mike, if you want to say the Skype. But basically, like, if we're three of us, right, and Mike is the one that actually printed the evidence. So you give me your, I don't know, your bike, I give you the money that Mike printed. So who is the actual creditor? Is it the bank who just printed something that provides an evidence that you gave me your bike and you got the money? No, it's not the bank. I mean, that's really, that's
it's really simple. But let me even say it in a more obvious way, which is the whole reason for my parable of perfect economy, because it gives this example. Mm-hmm. Ivan buys a house that I produce, and Ivan builds whatever Ivan builds. Let's say Ivan raises chickens, and he says, Mike, I'll give you $100,000 worth of chickens for the house you want $100,000 for. So Ivan writes me a promissory obligation to deliver me $100,000 worth of chickens, which by the value that we agree for his chickens comes out to, let's just say it's $1 a chicken. So he's going to pay me 100,000 chickens over, let's not make it mathematically perfected economy. Let's just say it's over 10 years. So I'm going to get 100,000 chickens over 10 years, which is more than I can use. So I'm going to need to give them to somebody else if I accept chickens. But let's say I can use them for some reason. Let's just say that's the case. So Ivan issues me a promissory note to give me 100,000 chickens over 10 years. 10,000 chickens per year. So, which is an awful lot, I realize, but we're just showing how a promissory obligation works. Yes, it's a lot.
I love chickens.
Yeah, I love chicken too. But can't eat that much.
You can never get too much chickens.
Okay, so here's the thing. So Ivan said, Mike, I'll give you 100,000 chickens, and I accepted that for some reason. That's exactly what I want. Okay, so how does this work then? Ivan gives me 10,000 chickens at the end of the first year, or the first day of the first year, or over the first year. Doesn't matter. But every time he gives me so many chickens, say he gives me 100 chickens, we subtract that from the 10,000 chicken that he owed because it isn't owed anymore, right? So we could keep the record right on that original note, and we'd say minus 10 chickens delivered at such and such a date, and I would sign it validating that indeed Ivan had provided me the 10 chickens or 100 chickens or 10,000 chickens or 1,000 chickens, whatever it is. Now the remaining principal is the original principal less what's been paid. So what happened to the promissory obligation? As it's paid, it no longer represented value, and it's retired from circulation because fulfillment voids its value. Simple as that. Do you get that, Ambassador? That's the situation. Ivan's issued the promissory obligation. It promises to give whatever to me. And as he pays it, it diminishes the balance and it diminishes the remaining value of the promissory obligation because all the payments are voided and retired from circulation. So that's the promissory arrangement between people, and that's the only way that money can represent true redeemable value likewise. Now let's do banking. We have the exact same situation, except the bank comes in between Ivan and me and says, nah, Ivan, you cannot issue your promissory obligation to Mike on your paper. It has to be printed on our paper. So now, Ivan, you will pay the chickens to us, and Mike, you have the piece of paper, and because we loaned you money, the same promissory obligation, a further representation of it, the principal is at risk, and that justifies interest. So Ivan, instead of owing us 100,000 chickens, you owe us 500,000 chickens, and you have to pay us 500,000 chickens over 10 years. But there's only 100,000 chickens in circulation. So Ivan is going to have to borrow another 400,000 chickens over the lifespan of that obligation, just in order to maintain the 100,000 chickens in circulation that he has to pay the bank 5 times over the same time span. Okay? All the bank did was give us the paper. So you're saying the chickens were owed the bank, is what you're saying, if the debt is to the bank. And it's not the case, because the bank all the bank is doing is acting as a publisher of a further representation of our promissory obligation, pretending it's loaning us money. That's the first money that comes into existence. No money existed before. So all they did was deny Ivan and I our universal right to issue promissory obligations to each other, pretending that the only form, justifiable form, and rightful authority was that they issue a representation of of the same promissory obligation, intervening between us, pretending to loan us money that never even existed to loan. They just created as it's needed, okay, which isn't creating it out of thin air or out of nothing. They created it out of our promissory obligation. They made Ivan go to the bank, sign a piece of paper and saying, "Oh, I'll pay Mike I'll pay 100,000 chickens to the bank for the 100,000 chickens I'm supposed to give to Mike." So the bank gives Mike a piece of paper representing 100,000 chickens and makes Ivan pay $500,000 to pay Mike, or 500,000 chickens to pay Mike 100,000 chickens. Mike's the only real creditor. Mike's the only thing that gave up the house. You know, I'm the one that said, "Ivan, I'll take your promissory obligation so long as its integrity is maintained by you contributing $100,000, 100,000 chickens to the overall pool of wealth, so I can spend the $100,000 on the 100,000 chickens." Okay? That's how I get my 100,000 chickens in this kind of economy base where promissory obligations rightly serve to represent our entitlement. Okay? But when the bank comes in the equation and says, "Yeah, no, they can't, promissory obligation can't represent your entitlement anymore because you have to borrow them from us at cost." So you sign a contract to issue a promissory obligation for the same amount. The real creditor gets that amount, and the bank claims that amount to itself, enriching itself 100,000 chickens for just in principle, for merely issuing a piece of paper. It's an ancient ruse. It's what put Jesus Christ on the cross. You know? I mean, it's as simple as that. You know? It's like, whew, that's an amazing thing. To issue paper and to dispossess the world for producing nothing, pretending money has to be borrowed from you when you're actually only producing a further representation of a promissory obligation, and to defraud the world out of all of its production and means of production by this is certainly criminal. You know, why isn't the money owed the bank? Because the bank never gave up anything worth a house or 100,000 chickens which were promised to pay for it. The bank gave up a piece of paper. It just took out its pen and it wrote on that piece of paper, "Ivan promises to give you 100,000 chickens."
Yeah.
And
just on that point alone, Mike, a few pennies just dropped. Ambassador just got it, and another guy, Martin, just got it as well.
Totally awesome.